Hi everyone, welcome back or welcome to my channel. My name's Lizzie and today I'm making a fitting video to talk you through the fitting process for making this top. Now this is the By Hand London Hannah top, which also comes as a dress version. I've made it in this lovely blue viscose linen that I bought from Lamazi Fabrics. I'm not going to talk to you in too much detail about the actual make because it's already featured in one of my sew and tell videos, so I'll link that in the corner or in the description box below. But I'll give you a very quick toile so that you can see what it looks like. I'm really pleased with it, and I did make a couple of toiles before making the final thing, so I'm going to show those to you and talk you through all of the various adjustments that I made. These are my toiles. I've kept them on a little hanger, and I love making toiles because I've written on them, I've literally drawn in biro on them to write down if it's toile number 1 or toile number 2 and which adjustments that I made. It's just really great to have kind of a track record of what I did and why. Before I put the first toile on to show you, I want to talk you through how I decided which size to make. Now this is the crucial bit, and I learnt so much about this when I did the bodice fitting masterclass with Elisa Lex from By Hand London, and I did that at the new craft house. I'd highly recommend. It's expensive, but the investment is really worth it. But anyway, I choose my size based on the high bust measurement of the pattern, and the By Hand London patterns are brilliant because they actually include the high bust measurement in the pattern sizing information. So my measurement fell in between two sizes. So my high bust measurement is a 31.5 inch measurement, which sits immediately between the size 8 and the size 10. So the size 8 is 31 inches, size 10 is 32 inches, and I was in between the two. Now I do have slightly broader shoulders compared to the rest of my frame, so I decided I did want to go with the larger size. So I decided to go for a size 10, which is the 32 inch high bust adjustment, which is only half an inch bigger than my measurement. However, the waist for a size 10 would be too big for me. My waist measurement of 26 inches perfectly matches the pattern size 8. So what I decided to do was go for a size 10 overall so that it would fit my high bust, but I graded down to a size 8 at the waist because I knew that my waist fit the measurements for a size 8. So that's what we're working with, a size 10 graded down to a size 8 at the waist. The next stage was deciding whether or not I needed to do any bust adjustments. So based on my size 10 that I'd selected, the bust measurement for the pattern is 34 inches. Now this is quite a bit larger than my bust measurement, which is 31.5 inches. So I knew that I'd need to do a small bust adjustment to take some of the volume out of the size 10 bust. So I've got a 2.5 inch difference between my bust measurement and the pattern's bust measurement. So to start with, I thought I'd try for a 2 inch small bust adjustment, which means taking 1 inch out of each side. So I did those changes to my pattern pieces and did my small bust adjustment before I made my first toile because I just knew I would definitely need to do a small bust adjustment. So now I'm going to put on toile number 1 to show you what I ended up with. This is my first toile, toile number 1. And so all I did to this was do my 2 inch small bust adjustment, so went on 1 inch on each side. Now I was really happy with how it fit on my bust, so I'm going to get quite close to the camera so that you can hopefully see. So sorry that my head's going to be chopped off. But I want to talk you through what kind of my diagnosis was for this fit, what still needed changing and what didn't still need changing. So I think that the bust fits really well in terms of how much volume is there. So that I was really pleased with, but I think there's still quite a lot of issues that I could improve upon on the front bodice. I'll show you the back. The back I was really happy with. I don't think any changes needed to be made to the back. I think it fits me really nicely across my shoulders. I think the darts fit nicely, so the back of the pattern was not an issue. But I still think there's quite a few things that need to be dealt with on the front here. So, firstly, there is a lot of excess fabric here. So kind of pointing from my bust up to the sleeve, there's just a lot of excess. You can see that actually I've ended up with no darts at all. The pattern has darts going from the bust down to the waist and from the bust out to the side seams, but my 2-inch small bust adjustment was so extreme that actually both sets of darts completely disappeared. So that was potentially why I've been left with some gaping, because that just meant there was no shaping anymore and that it was just a flat pattern piece. So I've got excess here. I also think that the shoulders don't fit quite right, so I think they're sitting on the right place in my shoulder, which is why I'm glad I chose the size 10 and not the size 8, because the size 8 would have been a bit too small. But I do think I've got a little bit of pulling, particularly on this side. You can see my black stitch line is just being pulled towards this shoulder slightly, and I have like a few sort of drag lines, so it's kind of weird. I've got excess here, but then I've also got a bit of tightness and a little bit of sort of drag lines on the shoulders. So those are things I felt that I needed to tackle. I also felt that this movement is a little bit restrictive, and I decided that raising the armhole would help to give me a little bit more arm movement. Now, I've got my notebook here again because I need to remember exactly what I did to fix all of this here. I knew that a wrap top wouldn't necessarily be the best fit for my figure, so I just wanted to make sure that it fit me really well to kind of counterbalance that. You will notice that this toile actually, I think, fits me a lot better than the end result, but that's only because that viscose linen fabric has quite a lot of give in it. So this toile is made in like a more sturdy but fabric. So actually what I've learned is that if I make this top in more of a structured fabric like a cotton, it is going to fit me more tightly, I guess, whereas this the fabric I made it in has quite a bit of give, which meant it's kind of ended up more of a loose fit. But I'm okay with that because I know that my pattern pieces are now how they need to be for a more structured fabric. But anyway, what did I do about this? So as you can see here, I've actually, or I hope you can see, I've actually drawn in red biro on my toile. I love that you can just draw on your toiles to figure out what needs to happen. So I pinched this out and I pinned it, and that seemed to be the amount that I needed to take out to get the front part smooth and take out this volume. So I pinned that in and was like, right, that's the fabric that I need to get rid of. But I didn't want a dart going from the shoulder, the sort of armhole here towards my bust, because that's a bit of an unusual dart placement. I mean, put darts wherever you want. I thought about it long and hard, and I realised I've lost my dart here. What I could do was actually create a dart here and then move the dart. So that would take the volume out here, but instead of having a dart here, I could then move the dart to give myself a bust dart again. I was really pleased when I figured that out because that felt like quite an achievement. And that meant a few things. In order to do that, I also needed to make an adjustment to the sleeve piece, because if I took volume out of the bodice front but not the sleeve, then the sleeve would be too big, or the sleeve head would be too big, so I had to make adjustments to the sleeve pattern as well. Then my drag lines, so I decided eventually that what might work to get rid of the sort of drag lines here is actually just to raise the outer corner of the shoulder. So I added 1 centimetre of height. That meant that I also had to raise the sleeve head by 1 centimetre to match, so that it basically meant that my front and back bodice pieces were 1 centimetre taller here, so I needed to add the same height to my sleeve head. So I hoped that those things were going to sort the main issues here. And as I said, I raised the armhole by 1 centimetre. Lastly, I decided that it was too short in the bodice and I wanted to lengthen it. As you can see, this is quite high above like my belly button and where my natural waist is, and it still needs the skirt or the peplum piece to be attached, so that waist would actually come up even higher by, 1.5 centimetres or what the seam allowance is. So I lengthened it by a couple of centimetres just to make sure that the top sat closer to my natural waist. Okay, now I'm going to show you what the second toile looks like, which by that point I was really nearly there with the fit. Here I am in toile number 2. Now you'll see I used a slightly different fabric this time, so instead of that, still medium to heavyweight but drapey fabric, I actually used calico this time. Now this is quite far away from the fabric that I was going to be using, but I wanted to use what I had. Really, you should toile with fabric that is as close as possible to the fabric you're going to be using, but I'm just not really worried about it enough to kind of buy extra toile fabric for each project. So I just make do with what I've got, and I had calico. Now let's have a look at this. Now I think this is nearly perfect in terms of the fit. Ignore the sleeves, they're obviously looking much more puffy because it's a structured fabric, and I decided not to make a full sleeve this time to save on fabric, but I did want to make, attach some sort of sleeve because I needed to check on the fit of the shoulders. Now as you can see, it's sitting so much more smoothly. I've got rid of all the excess that was here. I've got a bust dart going across here that's dealt with that, and raising the outer corners of the shoulders seems to have done the trick in terms of getting rid of the pulling here. So I was delighted, really, really pleased. But I'm sure some of you are currently shouting at your screens to say there's still something not quite right, and you'd be absolutely correct. This bust dart is too long, and it's also a bit too high. So if I get a bit closer, you can hopefully see that I've drawn in a red biro, roughly where my apex is, which is the fullest part of your bust. So I didn't want the bust dart to come out longer than the apex, and it's also a little bit too high. So that meant that all I needed to do as the final change to my pattern pieces before I made my final version was to just shorten that dart and lower the apex slightly. So that's what I did. I didn't feel that I needed to make another toile to double check that. I was confident that I could make those small tweaks and it would be fine. So I hope you can see kind of the difference in the fit, that this toile fits so much better than the first toile. It's just smoother, there's no pulling, there's no dragging, there's minimal excess. And actually, I really like how this feels in a more structured fabric. So as much as I'm pleased with my viscose linen one, I think I'm actually going to try making another one in a much more structured fabric. I mean, when I say structured, I just mean something that doesn't have drape. I'll make it in like a cotton or something. But yeah, so let me show you the final one again to remind you what the final result was. Ta-da! Here I am in my final finished by Hand London Hannah wrap dress, fitting nicely, no drag lines, no excessive gape, and I'm really pleased with all the changes that I made. Now, in the last few videos like this that I've made on my sort of fitting series, I've got into the nitty-gritty and really shown you the details of the pattern pieces. I'm kind of going to pose a bit of a question to you all. Is that helpful, or is it getting a bit repetitive? Because what I thought I could do, instead of showing you the pattern pieces in loads of detail each time, because it's quite time consuming from my end, because I often have to kind of retrace and recut the pieces so they're kind of visually good enough to show you guys. Should I just make a little mini series on how to do XYZ pattern adjustments? Because really I don't need to show you how to raise an armhole every time I make a video on fitting. A question. But anyway, I will at least just hold the pattern pieces up and show you briefly, because I want to show you what happened to my bodice, my front bodice pattern piece. Now, this is why I trace, people. Please, I really urge you to consider moving to Team Trace, because I think it's the best team to be on. The reason being is look at this absolute Frankenstein pattern piece. You can see up here, this is the extra that I added in order to raise the outer corner of the shoulder seam, of the shoulder. So that's that little triangle that I've added on here. Here, this is a whole mess of small bust adjustments followed by creating a dart here. So this is the dart that I created, but then I moved the dart round to here, and you can then see where I've then lowered that dart in my final step to lower the apex. And you can see at the bottom where I've added an extra few centimetres to make the pattern piece a bit longer. And also in this corner, this is where I raised the armhole and added a little bit of extra in here. I mean, this is just a mess, but it doesn't matter that it's a mess, because this is now my perfect fitting wrap top front piece, and if I ever want to retrace it so I have a nice fresh piece, then I can. But I actually quite like seeing the scars of exactly what I did. My back pattern piece is much less of a Frankenstein pattern piece because the only changes that I needed to make... Oh, and in fact, look, I can see a bit that I missed. I didn't raise the armhole on the back piece. So when you raise the armhole on a pattern piece, you have to raise it on the front piece, the back piece, and the sleeve piece. And I've actually forgotten to do it. What I should have done is added a little centimetre wedge here and sort of smoothed it off into the shape of the armhole. Whoops, I mean it's turned out okay, so I obviously got away with it, but I'll correct that for next time. And then you can also see at the top here, actually I think you can see it better contrasting with my top. You can see again I've added this, I've gone 1 centimetre up and then straightened off that line. That again is to add my little extra centimetre of height at the outer corner of each shoulder. So that's what I did to the back piece. The sleeve piece, look how huge this sleeve piece is to get these big, like billowy gathered sleeves. Humongous! So the changes to this were raising the armhole. Again, you can see my little 1 centimetre wedge that I've added at the edge here and graded it and sort of smoothed off into the curve. And on the other side as well, I've gone 1 centimetre up and then met the curve. I ended up needing to do quite a bit, well, not quite a bit, a fair bit to the sort of sleeve head. So firstly, I added an extra 1 centimetre of height here. And I sort of graded that in. I made sure that I'd graded it back and smoothed it into the original pattern piece by the time I met the notches on each side. The reason I needed to add this extra 1 centimetre of height here was to match the front and back pieces for adding my extra 1 centimetre of height at the outer shoulder corner. Then the last change that I needed to make to the sleeve pattern piece was to take out some length in the front edge to make up for the fact that I took the wedge out of the front, I created that dart and then moved it. So I basically took some length out of the front armhole of the bodice pattern piece. So that's what the effect of that was. I took out a dart, moved the dart, so it meant that this here was then shorter than it was to start with. So I needed to do the same to the sleeve. I hope that you can see this. Give me feedback if it's not as good as when I do it on the table. What I did was mark 2 little dots on the seam allowance. So I drew in my 1.5 centimetre seam allowance, which is in red pen, which you can see just dotted along here. This is a pivot point, so I cut from the edge into my pivot point, and on the other side I cut all the way through to the pivot point, and I then literally tilted this pattern piece down to take out the same amount that I took out in my dart. So I measured my dart to know how much I took out, and I literally created a hinge and went to close that gap to sort of take out length here, so that the sleeve length here was the same length as the bodice length here. I hope that was clear and I hope that makes sense. As I said, let me know. Do you want me to make a load of little mini videos that just do, you know, how to create a dart, how to move a dart, how to lower the apex, how to raise the armhole? Because I'd be, you know, really happy to do that, and it would make it easier so I don't have to kind of go through it each time in these fitting videos. I really enjoy making these fitting videos because I'm just really passionate about learning this stuff. For me, I'm about 5 years into my sewing journey now, so I'm really at a point where I want to focus on fitting. I could just go to the shops and buy really poorly fitting clothes, but making them gives me the power to learn to make better fitting clothes. And I just want to share that kind of journey with you, I guess, and share what I'm learning. So let me know. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please give this video a thumbs up if you did enjoy it, and I'd love to hear your feedback in the comments, and I'll see you next time. Bye!